Alright guys, today we're going to do a special episode. It's all about aging whitetails. Between myself and Rachel, Joe and his wife, and Chase, we killed 7 bucks last year. So we want to see how we did with aging, of what we thought to what they actually came back at. We sent these into deerage.com. Now it's important to note that on whitetails they're about 86% accurate, and if they're off, you know, that other 14%, if they are off, it's usually only by 1 year. So, you know, you could have an age that's off a year, but most of these are going to be right on the money. So we'll start out with Heather's here. She shot a buck during I think it was the last day of first shotgun here in Iowa. Her and Joe typically hunt together during shotgun seasons, and they had zero history with this buck. He just stepped out and Joe looked him over, and they noticed that dark staining on the forehead, the dark tarsals, and just had that look of a mature buck. And she elected to shoot him, and sure enough, they were right. That deer came back at 6.5 years old. So Joe, the next one up is Joe's. He was bow hunting in November. He doesn't get a lot of time to bow hunt, and he had no history with this buck. He was watching him, and I think he called to him a couple times now. He snort-wheezed at him and grunted at him a couple times, and this buck got all worked up with snort-wheezing and rubbing and acting like the bull of the woods. So that kind of tipped Joe off to maybe this was an older buck. At least he thought he was dominant anyway. So he did get that deer killed, and sure enough, he came back as a 5.5-year-old buck. Really a gorgeous buck. Next one up is Rachel's buck. I was hunting with her. That was first shotgun here in Iowa. Now this buck is one that we had history with. Joe and I actually filmed this deer in the fall of 2021, this past season. It was in November. We had a really good hunt. That same green source where I killed the Whiteeight. There was 2 or 3 other bucks down there. This particular buck, and I thought he was 4.5 years old, but as I seen that night, he thought he was the bull of the woods down there. And not that a 4.5-year-old couldn't or wouldn't act like that, but typically, you know, it's your older, more dominant bucks that are going to do all the snort wheezing and the chasing the other bucks off and stuff like this one did. And that made me think maybe this deer was a little bit older than what I thought, because like I said, I had him at 4.5 because the history went back to 2019. A year where he had a curlicue on his right side. He had a messed up antler, and I aged him at 2.5 that year. I noticed he was a little bigger bodied, so you know, maybe he was 3.5, but I thought he was only 2.5. We had him come in there one evening there during shotgun, and he wasn't making the jumps that even for a 4.5-year-old, I didn't think he had the genetics that we wanted on the farm. So she had the green light to shoot him if she wanted, and she did. And he ended up coming back at 5.5 years old. So I was off a year on that deer. Like I said, thinking he was 4.5, and he actually was 5.5. So that was interesting. The next one is that Stickers buck I shot off the new farm. Now here's a good example of body size. You know, doesn't really always dictate the age of the animal. This one in particular, you look at some of this footage we have from even the day that I killed him. You look at the body size, and he just looks small in the body. I mean, 3-year-old body size, you know. But I had trail pictures from the previous owners the year before, and you could see all that mass he had that year. And that's typically not something you're going to see on a 3-year-old buck. So I had him at older than 3.5 that year. So 4.5, 5.5, I wasn't real sure, but I had him as a mature buck. And so going into this year, you know, I thought he was probably 5.5 or older, and ends up he came back at 5.5, right on the money. So we were right on him. He was a mature buck, but there again, he didn't fit the mold for the body size characteristics you normally see on a 5.5-year-old buck. But sure enough, that antler mass tipped us off that was a mature buck. The next one is Chase's buck. Chase actually got fooled on this buck pretty bad. He came back at 5.5 years old. Chase thought he was 5.5 3 years ago, and so My thinking is, Chase is pretty good at judging these deer. My thinking is that there was another buck in there, possibly, that looked a lot like this deer, and maybe they got the two deer confused. But he came back at 5.5 anyway, so he's still a mature buck. He had that part right, but he thought he was quite a bit older. So I wonder if there isn't another deer in there that was very similar and they just got the two of them confused, because he had 3 years of history with this deer, like I said. The next one up is the Whiteeight. And so this goes back to 2019, I think, is when this deer was on the radar. And I thought he was 4.5 or 5.5 that year. I was unsure. He was a big-bodied deer, so I knew he had some maturity to him, but I was unsure of 4.5, 5.5. Like I said, it's tough to decipher those few years once they get to 4.5 and older. I thought there was a good chance this year that he was 7.5, but I remember even saying in the interview that I thought he could be 6.5, and he did come back at 6.5. So still happy with that. A 6.5-year-old buck is a heck of a trophy anywhere. 1 year younger than I thought he might be, but like I said, I was not sure that, I wasn't certain that maybe he wasn't 6.5 anyway. So the other buck, Tweezers. This buck's a good example of that darker forehead with the lighter face we see in the darker tarsals. Late season, he kind of just had that look about him. And we had history with him, would have been 2019 again. Joe filmed him on a pond set on our east fence one time. And I aged him at 3.5 that year. And of course that would put him at 5.5 this year. So I was going mainly by the history. That's a big takeaway too. If you can age them when they're younger, it's easier to age them when they're 2.5, 3.5. If you can get them aged then, and then you've got the history to go by. Of course, it makes it a lot better or a lot easier. You're probably only, if you are off at all, you're probably only off a year maybe. But Tweezers came back at 5.5, just what I thought he was. So we were right again on that one. But I don't know. This is just a lot of fun and very interesting to me, because I'm trying to manage the farm. So anytime we can pinpoint their age and know exactly, we're letting them get to maturity before we take them, that's a big interest of mine and a lot of fun. So out of 7 deer, we did pretty good. They were all 5.5 or older, with 6.5 on Heathers, 6.5 on Whiteeight, and the rest at 5.5. So heck of a year anyway. We'll do the same thing again next year, and we'll keep you posted on these ages, and maybe we can help you guys decipher some of the ages on these too. Hopefully you can take away at least 1 or 2 tips to help you out. So appreciate you guys joining us again. We'll see you on the next one.